Hey, hope you're doing well. Welcome to the very first episode of Next Gen. I'm really excited to have you here, and I'm really excited to be talking about tech with you guys. And for this episode, I want to talk about the iPhone 15 lineup coming out this fall. So this is something that's been interesting me particularly because over the past few years, iPhones have just gotten into this rhythm of feeling it's a little bit samey over the years. I'm mostly talking about the base iPhone, but also kind of with the Pro models, they just always kind of felt somewhat the same. So that's why the 15 in particular interests me because I think this is going to really take a big step forward for iPhones in the future. And so what I'm going to do for this episode is I'm going to talk about mostly the things that I think people would find most important. I'm not going to go into every single little granular detail about the lineup, but I am going to talk about what I think are going to be kind of the biggest changes, kind of the biggest things that people are going to be talking about. And then before I start, I do want to point out particularly that be sure to take all this with a bit of a grain of salt because things definitely change over time whenever you're talking about products that haven't released yet. New reports come out all the time and things do end up changing. Things have certainly been changing for the iPhone 15, and I just want to point that out before I start with this episode. So, the first point that I want to bring up is a complete redesign across the board for all four models. So, last year, Apple came out with the Plus model iPhone specifically before they had the Mini. The Mini didn't do so well for them, and so they ended up swapping it out for the Plus, and that's going to be the same this year. But overall, we're finally going to get a complete redesign for everything. I think it's especially important for the base model because the base models pretty much look the same for the past 5 or 6 years at this point. So I think a refresh is definitely long overdue and something that'll be very welcomed by a lot of people. So specifically, the base iPhone is going to be getting sort of like the Pro model treatment. So instead of having the notch like they've had ever since the iPhone 10, it's going to end up getting the dynamic island that we got from the iPhone 14 Pro last year. I think Apple is definitely going to start pushing this feature a bit more in the future. When it first came out, it wasn't really not a lot of functionality is really available for it at the time because it was such a new feature. But now that some time is passing and Apple's going to be bringing this across the board, I think it's going to really take the dynamic island a bit further than it is right now. We're definitely starting to see some new features, more companies releasing new integrations with the dynamic islands. It is, I believe, Uber recently came out with their own dynamic island integration. So hopefully, we'll start to see a bit more of that in the future. Now it's going to be adopted across the board. But in addition to that, interestingly, the base model iPhone is actually going to get a camera upgrade as well, and more than just a new sensor as well. Apparently, if rumors pan out, the 15 and the 15 Plus will be getting the 48 megapixel camera that the 14 Pro got last year. So basically, if you're not familiar with megapixels, basically megapixels measure the resolution of a photo that the camera is capable of taking. Typically, the standard megapixel count is 12 megapixels, which is what we've had on smartphone cameras for the past few years at this point. And pretty much no matter what phone you get nowadays, it is going to take a 12 megapixel shot. Um, Basically, there's some computation that goes on behind the scenes. You have what's called pixel binning, where basically a lot of the pixels are combined into uh, bigger pixels. All the information is basically combined. So all this is done to improve the image and the detail while also giving a higher quality photo. Because the iPhone 14 Pro had the 48 megapixel camera but took 12 megapixel shots, this basically let them add an extra zoom option in the camera app so that you could take optical quality at 2 times, even though only a 3 times lens was available. So this is something that's also going to be coming to the base model 15s, which is definitely going to be welcomed by a lot of people because the 48 megapixel camera supposedly took really great photos on the 14 Pro. But that's kind of the main thing that's coming to the 15s. But the Pro and the Pro Max also have some really interesting things coming because even though it was just redesigned last year, it is set supposedly to come out with even more really interesting new design elements. So first of all, we can pretty much expect the normal stainless steel build of the Pros to be uh, replaced in favor of titanium instead. I think one of the reasons for this is that there have been a lot of complaints about the the stainless steel on the Pros in the past. They tend to get a lot of fingerprint smudges, and that tends to I believe it's actually kind of ruined the finish on some of the phones in the past. And so moving to titanium, this would supposedly fix some of those issues. Uh, we have actually had Apple devices in the past that have used titanium. We've the PowerBook G3 back in the day used titanium. Uh, we had a titanium Apple Watch back in the day as well, and last year Apple came out with the Apple Watch Ultra, which was also made out of titanium. So it seems like Apple is starting to kind of move in this interesting new direction with some of their higher end devices being made out of titanium instead of the stainless steel that we used to have in the past. In addition to that, we're also going to have some new design changes with the just like the body shape of the phone as well. So ever since the 12 came out, the iPhone has had so they've gone back to the boxy design that was very popular on the earlier iPhones like the 4 and the 4S and the 5 and those earlier models before Apple eventually switched to the rounded phones ever since I believe it was either the 5C or the 6. But that it seems like with the iPhone 15 Pros, Apple's going to go for a sort of hybrid of the two. So one of the big complaints with the boxy design is that it doesn't really feel very comfortable in your hand. So what Apple is supposedly planning to do from some of the renders that we've seen that have been leaked from Apple, they're basically going to take the edges of the phone and they're going to basically curve them slightly. So kind of think of it as kind of like if you have a case on your phone. So instead of having the sharp sort of 90-degree angles on the edges of your phone, they're going to have a slight curve to them all the way around. And this would also be the same for the not just the back of the phone, but also the bezels, which are supposedly going to be much thinner than they are right now. So from what I've seen compared to a lot of other flagship phones from companies like Samsung and such, Apple's bezels do like by themselves it looks totally fine, but if you put it up against a modern Android flagship, you tend to notice that the bezels look a lot thicker by comparison. So what I find interesting is that if rumors pan out, supposedly the iPhone is actually going to have the world's thinnest bezels on any smartphone. I believe the last phone to hold this record was one of the latest smartphones from Xiaomi, which is a Chinese smartphone manufacturer. I believe the record for that was 1.61 millimeters. And Apple is supposedly going to beat that with a 1.5 millimeter bezel all across the edge. And just like the edges on the back, these will also be slightly curved over the at the edge of the phone. So the display itself will still continue to be flat, but the bezels themselves will have a slight curve to them. On the downside of this, it does seem like there's a possibility that the Pro models are going to get a price increase, though. So over the past few years, iPhones have pretty much stayed the same 800 for 900 for the base models and 1000 and 1100 for the Pro models. But it seems like this year is a possibility that Apple's going to up the Pro models by $100. So it would start at 1100 and then the Pro Max would cost 1200. But to compensate for this, Apple does seem to have a lot of new features that would be some would kind of trickle down to the base model, but the the high end of it is going to be reserved specifically for the Pro models. And I'll get to that with these next few features that we'll be getting. One of them being Apple will finally be adopting USB-C all across the board. So Apple's been very slow to adopt USB-C on their phones, mostly because Lightning is a proprietary connector for Apple. So whenever they can license this out to other accessory manufacturers, and this ends up being a billion-dollar business for them. It works in billions for them every single year, and so they've been very slow to adopt USB-C, even though it is basically a charging standard at this point. But if you haven't heard of the current European Union regulations right now, basically the European Union is adopting USB-C as a standard port, and it's going to be requiring uh, tech companies to adopt this as their standard. So basically, it's going to force Apple to switch to USB-C no later than 2024. And rumors right now have been they're practically confirming that the 15s are going to have USB-C alongside the AirPod Pros coming out supposedly around the same time. So supposedly, once the 15s come out, then Apple will update the AirPod Pro 2s to have a USB-C charging case. Uh, Standard AirPods won't have this, and supposedly it won't be having this on the AirPods 4 either. Supposedly up to the AirPods 4 or so, those are going to continue to be Lightning, while the AirPod Pros will continue to have USB-C. Although I have not heard any information about the Maxes yet. Hopefully, those also will get USB-C since those are Apple's highest end offerings. The only downside to USB-C though is the fact that Apple is still going to try and take advantage of its billions of dollars in Lightning accessories. And by that I mean, as things currently stand, Apple has a program called MFi, which is short for Made for iPhone. And basically, what this does is it's basically like a certification program that shows that certain devices are specifically licensed by Apple. It's using Apple licensed technology to allow for charging and data transfer and such. And this is what allows Apple to earn the money from the industry because they are able to receive money from licensing fees. The issue is because USB-C is more of a standard, they don't own this technology, and so they can't license USB-C itself out to other companies. So what they plan to do is still use the MFi program by using basically putting hardware in the phone that would physically limit charging and data transfer speeds unless you're using an Apple licensed cable. So even though they're not using an Apple proprietary connector, they still have to use Apple proprietary charging technology. And the upside to this, though, is that supposedly the European Union would potentially rule this out as an illegal move by Apple because the they don't own USB-C. So hopefully we'll get more information as time goes on, or when the iPhone 15 eventually comes out. So in addition to the redesign and the USB-C, we have some other really interesting things that may not make it this year. There's been some debate over it. So one feature that has been kind of been an icon of iPhones ever since the beginning was the physical ringer switch. So on any iPhone that you go and get, you have the volume buttons on the left side, and above the volume buttons, you have a little physical switch that will switch between uh, ringer mode and silent mode. And a lot of people have really enjoyed this feature. In fact, another smartphone manufacturer, OnePlus, has also been using this on their smartphones as well. And a recent OnePlus phone that they released ended up cutting out the ringer this ringer switch that they've had on their phones as well. But a lot of people have a lot of people were not happy about the change at all. Like, people were pretty upset, and I believe OnePlus did end up bringing this back, but when it happened at first, people were not happy. And I bring this up because supposedly Apple is going to be doing something very similar with the 15 Pros. There have been a lot of rumors that Apple is going to be cutting out the ringer switch, but in its place would be something that they released on the Apple Watch Ultra, which is the uh, a multifunction action button. So on the Apple Watch Ultra, this is kind of where it first came up. The action button is basically an extra little button that was on the Apple Watch Ultra that could let you uh, put in a custom programmable action. And there have been rumors that Apple is going to be bringing this to the 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max. And there've been right now there's a little bit of like debate uh between leakers right now. Like, there's some conflicting reports. Some are saying that Apple could still be adding it. Others are saying that they're possibly going against it uh, due to some issues that I'll talk about in a little bit. But supposedly, what the multifunction button would do is it would let you program it in a similar way to how you would have the controls on a set of AirPod Pros. So you could basically what I would mean by that is that you could press a button once, it would perform a certain action. Press it twice, perform another action. 3 times, hold. It would all have these different actions built into it. So overall, it would be a more versatile option compared to something like the ringer switch, especially for people like me who don't really use it, just leave their phone on silent all the time. Uh, what I find particularly interesting about this is that it wouldn't just be just a normal button with programmable features. It would actually be something that could be context specific based on the app you're using. For example, there have been rumors that if this does pan out this year, we could end up seeing the action button as being like a shutter button in the camera app. So basically, what would happen is you open up the camera app, and when you're ready to take a picture, you would press down slightly on the action button, and it would autofocus. And if you do a full press, it would take the picture. Basically, it would function just like a normal camera. And based on this, we could end up seeing more similar features based on whatever app that is you're using. Other apps could potentially allow for their own functionality depending on what app you're in and how many times you press the button and such. So usually a lot of buttons on smartphones don't have this kind of functionality where you have slider presses doing one thing and full presses doing another. And there's a reason why Apple would do this specifically. It's also part of the reason why there's a possibility we won't be seeing the action button. There's a possibility that there will be, but we're not entirely sure yet. But what's kind of throwing this all up in the air is another feature that uh, Apple planned to do. Might not be happening this year. May actually be happening next year instead. I'll get to all that in just a second, but it's the idea of what are called solid state buttons. So I remember back from the days of the Touch ID smartphones, the Touch ID iPhones, Apple had a feature on the Touch ID home button. I don't know if anyone's ever noticed this with the the iPhone, but basically, if you press that button, you're not physically pressing a button on the bottom of the phone. So the reason for this is because that Touch ID sensor on the iPhones was an example of a solid state button. Basically, you press it, and a haptic motor inside of the phone vibrates, and it kind of simulates the feel of pushing a button. Uh, and this is something that Apple had planned to bring to the iPhone 15 lineup this year. We have seen this before, I believe, an HTC phone used solid state buttons, and from articles that I've read and reviews of the phone, the haptics were not very good. It was not a very convincing implementation. And why I think that the reason iPhone could be doing it better is that Apple would specifically design it to make it feel a bit more convincing. Android phones in general have never really had the best haptics, at least as of a few years ago. The Android phones have definitely come a long way. The Pixels, the Galaxies definitely have way better haptics than they used to have. Believe me, I've tried smartphones from earlier years, and they did not have very good haptics at all. But one thing that Apple has definitely been known for on iPhones is having really good haptic feedback. And the reason why I think this could be better is that Apple would be specifically engineering these buttons to feel more realistic. So the plan was to have two, in addition to the normal haptic motors that are inside the iPhones right now, Apple would also introduce two other haptic motors in each side of the phone. So basically, what Apple planned to do was have the current volume buttons be replaced by a single sort of pill-shaped rocker switch, where if you basically press the top of the switch, volume goes up. Press the bottom of the switch, volume goes down. And then on the right side, you would have basically another bump on the side that would normally be the button that would normally press in like a physical switch, but instead it would be pressure sensitive, and you push that, get haptic feedback, and it functions just like the normal button as it is right now. But similar to the Touch ID button, they wouldn't physically press in. It would be pressure sensitive, and then the haptics would respond to make it feel like an actual physical press. And the reason why uh, I link this back to the multifunction button is because initially Apple was going to put it on all buttons, but because there are some hardware complexities going on, that this is potentially being pushed back to the 16 Pros instead of the 15 Pros. But if Apple came up with the action button this year, they would make it a haptic button as sort of a way to uh, sort of get people used to the idea of having haptic buttons, because there's some conflicting there are people who feel a bit conflicted about the idea of having haptic buttons instead of physical ones, typically because uh, physical buttons just tend to feel a little bit nicer. They actually feel more like you're pressing a button. But considering that Apple did this before with the Touch ID iPhones, I think this could definitely. I think it could end up being a bit. I think it ended up being a hit with the iPhone 16 Pros when they come out. But basically, because of the hardware complexities and everything, that's the reason why the multifunction button is being so uh, debated right now. And if it did end up coming out, this would be the only button on the phone uh, that would be solid state. And you might be wondering, well, how would Apple deal with this if these buttons are going to require power for the pressure sensors and the motors and all that? If the phone was out of battery, you wouldn't be able to press the buttons. So Apple's thought of this, and they have a potential solution for it. Supposedly, Apple is developing a new sort of microprocessor that they'll put in the iPhones. So as of now, Apple has basically had a power reserve feature in the iPhones for a while now, where basically a little bit of power we set aside for things like Find My, Apple Pay Express, and other features like this that would be used while the phone was off or dead. And with this new microprocessor, basically what this will allow the phone to do is use these features without ever running out of power. Basically, it would be sort of like an endless power supply for their ultra low power mode, their power reserve. And this would also power not just the features that I mentioned a second ago, but also the the new haptic buttons. So basically, that's kind of an overview of what Apple's going to be doing with sort of the phones across the board for the most part. But there's one particular new feature that Apple is going to be putting specifically on the Pro Max. This is interesting because we haven't had Pro Max exclusive features since the 12 Pro Max. Back then, it was uh, basically it had better image stabilization compared to the other iPhones, but basically it was something that would specifically uh, differentiate the Pro Max from the normal Pro. So before I tell you exactly what it is, let me give you a little bit of background. A lot of Android companies have basically, if there's one camera feature that they've really been focusing on, it's better zoom capabilities. So, for example, Samsung's been working on their space zoom for a few years now, basically 100 times zoom on their highest end models. I believe the S24 Ultra next year is actually rumored to get 150 times zoom. So things are getting really crazy right now in the zoom space. But Apple has been one company that has been notably left behind. I've especially noticed that I actually really enjoy. I'm probably one of the few people who actually really does use Zoom on my smartphone. I've had the S22 Ultra before. The Zoom on that was absolutely crazy. I absolutely loved it. Uh, and the reason I bring all this up is because this could be the year that Apple actually decides to do something about that. So one of the big ways that companies tend to get better zoom levels on smartphones is through what's called a uh, it's called a periscope lens or a folded lens, which is basically I'm not really too familiar with the technical side of things, but basically it sort of manages the light in a way where it can get more a further level of zoom by itself. And usually this can allow for like 5 or so times zoom compared to normal telephoto lenses on smartphones, which are usually 2 to 3 times zoom. For example, the S22 and S23 Ultra from Samsung, they have a 3 times telephoto as well as a 10 times, I believe it's a 10 times periscope lens. So what Apple is planning to do with the Pro Max is supposedly it's very heavily rumored that the Pro Max is going to be getting a periscope camera on the Pro Max, but it's a little bit interesting because usually periscope lenses are separate lenses in addition to the normal telephoto cameras. So what's interesting about this is that this is going to be supposedly a 5 to 6 times either one of those optical zoom built directly into the telephoto camera that's currently on the Pro Max. So basically, you'd get both 3 times and 6 times optical zoom from one lens. I believe this is one reason why it's going to be specifically on the Pro Max. I imagine you would probably need, a bigger phone to manage the extra technology that's going on in that lens. But I find it's interesting because if that if Apple can get an additional 6 times optical zoom on the Pro Max, then the max level of zoom could be even greater. Like we could potentially see a much greater focus in the future on zoom for the iPhone. So that really, as a zoom user, that really excites me for iPhones. I mean, overall, from all the things that we've mentioned, the redesign for the 15 and the 15 Pro, the really awesome new looks that hopefully we're going to be seeing. Uh, Finally, the introduction of USB-C. Hopefully, the new action button that's coming out. Uh, the potential for solid state buttons, at least for the action button, and then also the new zoom lens on the Pro Max. All that really seems to be adding up to what I think is going to be an exciting upgrade for this year. Something that I think could really entice people who've been holding off to potentially put their money on this year and end up upgrading to the next model. Like it could be really exciting for a lot of people. So that was kind of a look at the iPhone 15 Pro coming out this fall. I hope you really enjoyed listening to this episode. If you did, be sure to follow the podcast wherever you're listening from. I'm excited to have new listeners. And for now, I'll see you guys next time. Adios.